introduce you, and
Ah.
then
Okay, don't I have to count to 30, Sue?
yeah, you could count to about 10 at this point.
10, okay. Hi, everyone. I'm so pleased to welcome you to the Distinguished Poets Series, which at the moment is taking place on Zoom. I'm thrilled to introduce Jose Antonio Rodriguez, whose latest books are the poetry collection, This American Autopsy, and the memoir, House Built on Ashes. His work has appeared in The New Yorker, The New York Times, The Nation, Poetry, Patterson Literary Review, and elsewhere. He holds a PhD in English from Binghamton University and teaches in the MFA program at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. I want to say about Jose two things. One, that I've never gotten this short a bio from anybody. So he's welcome to fill in more things, which he's gotten a lot of prizes and everything else, but he didn't bother to mention it in his bio. So he's quite free to mention anything he wants. And I will say that recently Marion mentioned to me that she had found this poem in the New Yorker. And she said, I want to read it to you. And she said, it's by Jose Antonio. And she didn't even finish. So I go, that's my student. So she read the poem and it was so wonderful, so wonderful. And it's so hard to get into New Yorker, almost impossible. So not only did he get in that time, but a different editor has now chosen, from the New Yorker, has chosen to include another poem of his, which will be appearing soon. I have to say that I am so proud of Jose, and I think he's so wonderful, and his work is so amazing. And if he were here, I would give him a big hug. Well, maybe I wouldn't, because I haven't hugged anybody in a long time. Being paranoid about this getting.
We would have to put on masks.
Yeah, one of those plexiglass things. Hi, Jose. Anyway, let's give Jose a round of applause and welcome. And read, Jose, we want to hear you.
Thank you. Thank you for that great intro, Maria. It's lovely to see you again. We haven't seen each other in several years, and I have very, very, very fond memories of being your student and being welcomed into your space and being being affirmed and being championed, which was so really so good, so necessary for me as a writer, but not just as a writer, but as a human being, to feel like I had something important to say and something that mattered. So thank you for that. Thank you everyone for being here. I will read a little bit from the last two books of poetry. And then I think I'll end it with one of the, I've had several poems appear in the New Yorker. I'll end it with the one that appeared in April, which is the latest one. It's called In the Presence of Sunlight, but which it is a lot about setting, which will tie in nicely with what we did a little while ago, the workshop on setting. Place is very important in my poetry. Maybe the most important thing. I think part of it is because my early childhood, or all of my childhood, I felt in a lot of ways out of place. At the very least anxious about wherever it is that I was, and at worst, just completely beaten down by either the heat, or or the bullies at school, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I am a person who has always sort of struggled to feel like completely at ease anywhere I am, it's like completely comfortable and chill. That's not me. I'm always a little bit on edge. And so I think that's why my poetry, even when I'm not conscious of it, is always like very aware of place and where the speaker is standing figuratively, literally and figuratively. So I'll start with the earlier book, which is called Backlit Hour, which came out in 2012, I think. And then the latest one is This American Autopsy, which came out in 2019, which was well reviewed and was received, I'm proud to say, received a notice in the New York Times when it came out. So Backlit Hour, here we go. From the mottled light, from the mottled light. When I return from school, dragging the smallest Christmas tree, you look up from the side of the bed where you sit wearing the nightgown, pockmarked, the one you wear around the stove making coffee for Dad, the one you wear by the one cabinet, pulling out cups for our handful of cereal, the one that catches between the screen door and the frame when you say goodbye, the folds of the fabric turning in the early light of morning, the one that only seems to hold you as if you were whole, because you're really gone from the mottled light falling over our ghosts, and I don't know any different. So I hug your thighs, brush my cheek against the fabric, and say nothing, not because there are no words, but because there are so many, pushed away into every crevice of the sheetrock walls, every crack of the window pane. And I tear needles from the tree, mute at my feet, hold them up to you, verdant and scented and already dying. So here's another one that explores my relationship with my mother, which is a very formative one. Surprise, surprise. I grew up with a stay-at-home mom, working, well, a home working mom. I'm the youngest of 10, so that was her life, was being a mother. And my father had very long working hours. He worked like manual labor, and so I didn't see him often. And when he was home in the evenings, for a couple of hours before he went to bed very early, because he had to get up so early, he was not really present. I think he was just so exhausted. And so my mother had a sort of an outsized influence on me. I think because my father had a lessened influence to a lot of it. But anyway, here we go. Like a bar of soap against a washboard. Don't ask me why, but if I had a house, I'd turn rooms into replicas of the places I've lived. Dirt floor and all, a kitchen with its dim light bulb like my mother's face. All her love worn down like a bar of soap against a washboard. A kitchen with its one cabinet, a can of Spam on its lip like a buck tooth. With a corner where cockroaches never die. With its cute little door and maybe a mouse with a broken neck behind it, a hungry mouse reaching for the tiniest clump of flour dough. I want the 2-foot Christmas tree the second grade teacher substitute gave us, planted in a Crisco can filled with dirt, with 8 blue lights that spoke beauty like nothing I've seen since. We should have never thrown it out, nor the cot and the walls that press against our shoulders at night, so that you retreat under it, risk a bump on the head when you wake, the light again in the room, wrinkling my eyes. And this one is about high school. Oh, high school. Am I right? Yeah. It's a magical place. And magical is the word, I think. Fantastical also. To say goodbye to high school. Would you like to go to the prom with me? She asked, her voice tremulous. I'd graduated the year before, but worked at the old high school when I knew her less, and I knew her less than I knew of her. The names she was called, because she wore thick glasses, had a hint of mustache, loved math. I just waited too long to ask someone, she offered, with arched eyebrows, performing surprise at her lack of luck. And there, within the white walls of the front office, I said, sure, never having even kissed a girl, never having kissed anyone, yet oddly excited about the ritual, the one I'd never performed, and she smiled wide. I picked her up in my rusty Ford Escort, 6 blocks from home, in the part of town with window bars. No one stepped into the living room to see us off. We dined on Chinese food, other couples in tables like islands. She asked me about the local college, and I asked her about her plans. I'd like to go away to school, she said, and I hoped she'd find the place where no one would call her names. Where she could always be this, the shimmer of satin, elegant, like her prized equations. At the country club, we rushed to the photo line. Her first wish upon entering that place that was the fairy tale ending. Ahead of us, a couple fidgeted. She smoothed her skirt, he wetted his lips and practiced a smile before a mirror. The X on the floor, a claim on a map. I draped my arms around her, smiled before the flash like an undreamt dream. The others, in designer gowns and perfect tans, rioted laughter, ambled across the dance floor as if it were their living room. We sat transfixed by the crystal chandeliers, wondering if this elaborate parade was supposed to spell beauty, fearing that we, in the awkward sidelines, would never learn how to claim it as our own, would never find the way to say goodbye to high school. Let's go, she said then, intending to be kind, to put me out of what she thought was misery, though she needn't have. And I regret even now that I lacked the courage to tell her I was happy to be chosen, happy to have shared this, something about how two people who were never picked each other. Luster. The dollar store hangs on like cheap flannel, and the movie theater, pushed around by ever more gargantuan television sets, dies a slow death, like the movie drive-in where I went once to see John Travolta gyrate in Perfect. Before they stopped manning the booth one evening, ripped out all the speakers, and left the screen only to bend like cardboard on wind-blown days, where dusk almost always stole focus anyway, left every surface warm and hued in its wake, like the strip mall concrete under my palm. I've always loved sidewalks when the world is coming in for the day, because you can slow down, sit, be still where everybody would be passing through. For a moment, quiet again. The fevered dreams and disappointments have settled into a murmur like the cursive of falling leaves, and life is bearable once more. I remain until the muscles stop rumbling, until the hair on my forearms doesn't mind the sweat, until my arms are the sweat, until I am only the gaze that falls on a shoeless man, on a shoeless man turning a corner and disappearing, leaving an empty parking lot laced with autumn's leaf, and just beyond it, a golden sky, so aglow that for a second you forget what lies past that intangible luster. And now move to This American Autopsy, which is looks a little beyond the self, and engages more with the world. It's a little bit more, I guess, politically engaged poetry collection than the previous one, but it does have very sort of autobiographical poems. So I think I'll stick to reading those kinds of poems, because just to sort of stay within a general theme. The first one is called Challenger, and I was in 6th grade when the Challenger space shuttle exploded midair, and all the astronauts, 6 or 7 of them, died, and it was, it's just a national mourning, a tragedy. There had been a lot of lead up to that space flight. A lot of it was very much in the media who was picked, who was going. I believe in the Challenger was the name of the space shuttle. There was the first, I want to say it was the first woman astronaut. Here we go, Challenger. Someone knocked at the door and we all turned our heads. The Challenger exploded, the principal said. The astronauts are dead. Turn on your TV. The newscaster saw him with his perfect hair. You cannot see the astronauts in the image. You cannot hear them. They are tiny inside that huge ship that itself looks tiny inside the TV screen. I think this is supposed to be sad, but I can't picture the astronauts dying. Can't even picture their tiny screams. They were excited, then they weren't. Like every night when I lie in bed, mumbling the chores for the following day, until I don't, though I don't know when. The news keeps airing the video like a drill, and like a drill, we learn it. The shuttle then resembling a toy, a flying saucer, rising into the blue until it transformed into a cloud of white, foamy streams like firecracker snakes that reached the edge and were gone. American Abundance, or First Trip to H-E-B Grocery Store, which is a big chain of grocery stores in the Southwest, and they're huge. Like the size of a Walmart, but it's all food. And so it's just kind of excess would be the word. So I remember the first few times that, my mom took me to that grocery store as a child, and just kind of awed by the immensity of it and everything in it. And before H-E-B, I was sort of used to, there was a little store in the Mexican village where I grew up, but there was a counter between you and the things, the things you bought, and a person would get the things and then give them to you and charge you. But you couldn't touch the things yourself, right? You can grab them before you paid for them. But this was different. You had a shopping cart, right? Carnation milk can sat on the shelf in the store. The reddest flower copying itself over and over. So many perfect bouquets at the same edge, and no counter between them and me. I feared they might go bad, spoil, because surely nobody could, no matter how hungry, empty this landscape where magic repeated itself over every tile. Having been allowed to hold every bag and box, every sum in my hands, and place them in a wheeled cart without anyone to say no, to demand payment, I asked Mom if we could just walk out, take it all home. But no, there was the young woman in uniform, and her steady hands passed every item over a clear window by the register with a red eye that beeped. And on the other side, every item tilted, dropped, and rolled, revealing the mark, a block of lines like prison bars, and numbers with hard corners, the code by which to pass the scanner like a bridge. The Hollow. When Dad left to look for work, the orchards he had tended, now burnt by the ice of a December winter, didn't miss him. And the orange that he otherwise would have stolen and chilled in the fridge to later segment for all of us, like edible love, remained on the imaginary tree that survived. The linoleum cracked under his flea market suitcase. I imagined the mice then still under the floor, and I didn't cry, not because I wouldn't, but because I didn't know to. Even such displays must be modeled. All this I have imagined because I don't actually remember when he left, only that one day he did not sit at the table, and the hollow filled my hands with the sorrow quiet like the anonymous tree, leaning on the window, frail in the winter wind and fruitless. Two more, I'll read two more poems and then there'll be maybe a couple minutes for questions. Does that sound okay? Antarctica. I'm waiting for the screen's talking heads, cheeks red and engorged, to stop bobbing, to quiet until only mute faces linger, unblinking and quenched. I'm waiting, I think, for the world to empty of words, like one of those lakes in Antarctica that develops a crevice in its belly and dissolves in hours. A lake older than mountains, rushing to the great center, that imagined place, leaving behind the form of its absence. And now I'll read, thank you. I'll read In the Presence of Sunlight, which is online, as all the poems in the New Yorker are. If you click on it, you can see it on text, of course, and also hear me read it. There's a recording of me reading it. So hopefully my reading today will be at least as effective as the one in the recording. I'm kidding. I don't think I'm a very good reader, but but we'll see. Let's see how it goes. Here we go. In the Presence of Sunlight. Our bodies had limits, perimeters, edges marking the end of us and the beginning of not us. The flies hovering in space, the dirt floor stubborn beneath everything. The table too was rectangular every time, as was the door facing west and its modest field of corn or sometimes sorghum. A mesquite in one corner, a mulberry tree in the other. And when they started losing their traces, branches blending in with the purpling sky behind them, I knew to turn back to the kitchen so as not to miss it. My family slowly fading away, beginning at the edges, the nearest part of their bodies always the last to go, then the glint of the eyes, and hardly shadows with voices, humbly calling out, "The sun is leaving us." I've written about this so many times. Thank you. And yeah.
Thank you. My goodness.
Thank you. We have a couple of minutes. I mean, this is supposed to go till 2, right? So it's 1:53 right now. If anybody has any questions about anything today, about life, I'm kidding. About writing or publishing or anything like that.
I will tell you that your prompt devoted to the house, the floor plan, etc. I was quite surprised at how vividly I could draw a floor plan, not having practiced any blueprint craft in years. And I saw it in cross section. I saw it top down. I was seeing it from many angles. So I was having my technical experience come back to me, but this time it was informed by my artistic orientation.
Right.
And then I began to vaguely recall passages from a book by some sort of French philosopher about the concept of house or home. I don't
Right.
remember the title. And then I recalled a prompt given to us by a dear friend of many of us, Kat Doty, who used cotton and various scents to stimulate thinking about many things, among which was the house. So thanks for evoking so many experiences, not just the home experience, but the writing experiences about home.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. No, you're very welcome. It is amazing what I think what memory, I'm sorry, what the mind records consciously, but also subconsciously, right? Like how aware the mind is and the body is of the environment, even when we're not consciously going, I need to remember this, right? And we figure that out. We realize that when we go back in time and think, and there's all this like bank of information that we didn't even know we had taken in.
Yeah.
We didn't even, but that's how perceptive the body is. It's amazing. That's how perceptive the mind is. And even in very young childhood, we're just like, maybe even particularly then, because children are by nature vulnerable. And so children, generally speaking, have to be like more careful about how they move through the world because they're weak, they're little, and they're surrounded by giants, right? And adults can be a little bit more careless and more whatever, right? We're grown and we can quote unquote defend ourselves. But children, there's an awareness like, oh, I'm tiny and I'm not strong. And so we're much more careful how we move through the world. And so the body and the mind is like registering everything, not just like exit signs, you know? Yeah. Any other comments or questions?
What kind of culture shock did you go through moving from a Mexican village out into the world?
The most obvious one was like all the way the world was just physically different than where I had grown up. I was, the village was very far away from the city. I did go to the city sometimes, a few times when my mom would take me to the doctor. I remember vaguely going to the city in Mexico, but my everyday life was all dirt and an outhouse and stuff. And so to come to McAllen, and that's where I grew up, McAllen, Texas and South Texas, and there was so much concrete and there was so much light at night and so many fences. And so it was a little overwhelming, not always in a negative way. I mean, it was kind of exciting, but it's very noisy. I remember that, like the sound of traffic, I was not used to that. And also at night, I couldn't see all the stars that I could in the Mexican village. The night sky was dim in the city. I remember that. But yeah, the sound, I think the sound of traffic was a little much. And now, of course, you're used to it, you don't even consciously hear it, right? But it was so quiet in that Mexican village. I mean, a lot of people didn't even have a car. There was a few people who were a little bit better off than the rest, and they had a vehicle, but my family didn't. So we had to go to the doctor. We had to like ask for a ride, or go there was a train. Yeah, it's another world. It's another world. It had its beauty, but yeah, it was rough. Maria, I can't hear you. You're mute.
Now I'm unmuted, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just trying to ask you how old were you when you first came to the United States to live?
I was 5, but we were just like, it was an hour. We were still very close to the village, just on the American side. So we would like go back every weekend and still like stay there. And then as the years went by, we started going back less and less often, you know. And now well, that village doesn't really exist anymore. I mean, it's something else now. And a lot of the people who live there moved away either to the city or to the US. So, so yeah, it's not far away from where I am right now. Right now I'm in Edinburgh, which is right next to McAllen, where I grew up. But it's so geographically it's not far away, but it is like a world away in terms of, yeah. I mean, I grew up with cloth diapers, and I was born in the 70s. Cloth diapers, that's nuts.
I had my cloth diapers on my kids. It shows how old I am.
Yeah,
It was
I mean,
horrible, I have to say. But anyway.
yeah, yes, I can only imagine. My mom, I am the youngest of 10.
Yeah.
So
Oh my God, the poor woman.
yes, that is what every mother tells me when I tell them that my mom had 10. When I tell a single woman that when I tell a woman without children that my mother had 10 children, they're like, oh, you know, wow, that's a lot. But when I tell a woman who has had children that my mother had 10 children, they like freak out a little bit. Yeah. They're like, oh, you know, because of course, they imagine their 1 or 2 pregnancies multiplied, and I can't even.
Right.
Because I'm a baby when it comes to like a little bit of nausea, you know. So I can't imagine like weeks of nausea or months of nausea. I can't. So I try and be good to my mother, and yeah.
Jose, I want to thank you. That was a wonderful reading and a wonderful workshop. Let's give a round of applause. If you can unmute yourself, let's give Jose a round of applause. And thank you very much, Jose, for being with us today and for your wonderful work.
Thank you for having me.
Thank
If
you.
you're curious about more about my writing, visit my website, www.jarodriguez.org. So thank you, Maria, for inviting me. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Be safe.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Good to see you guys.
Yeah,
Bye.
it was a great workshop.